Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got a really fascinating mission for you.
Yeah, we are stepping into a landscape where the raw economic data, it just doesn't tell the whole story.
Right. Not even close. We're pulling excerpts from Andrew Ross Sorkin's book, 1929, Inside the Greatest Crash in Wall Street History and How It Shattered a Nation.
Such a great source text.
It really is.
Yeah.
And our goal here is to look way beyond the dry numbers. We want to unpack the human drama, the fierce political battles, and just the absolute psychological contagion that drove the 1920s stock market boom.
Yeah, we want to understand the hubris of the men who built this massive bubble and why they couldn't or wouldn't stop it.
Exactly. And to do that, we actually have to start with a moment of pure hidden desperation. Picture this. It's October 28th, 1929.
The big one.
Yeah. You're Charles Mitchell, the head of National City Bank, which is, at the time, the largest bank in the country.
Right.
Your bank's stock is in a catastrophic freefall. The ticker tape is hours behind.
Oh, that tape delay is so crucial.
Right. Nobody actually knows what anything is worth. The terror in the air is just palpable, and if your bank's stock collapses, it triggers the biggest bank run in the history of the world.
It is a truly existential threat for a man who spent his whole life building that exact institution.
Definitely.
And that physical reality of the ticker tape delay, it's huge. Because in a financial panic, darkness breeds absolute terror. When you don't know the price of your assets, you just assume the absolute worst.
So Mitchell goes on a walk with his bank president. They stop at the corner of 65th and 5th Avenue, and Mitchell secretly commits to personally borrow $12 million.
Which is like a staggering amount of money back then.
Several times his entire net worth. He decides to risk his personal fortune, his family's future, everything, to buy up his own bank's plummeting stock just to stop the bleeding.
And he's forced to do this in absolute secrecy. Because, think about it. If Wall Street found out the chairman of the largest bank was personally bailing out his own company.
Oh, it would be over.
Exactly. The illusion of stability would shatter, and the panic would have been absolute. What's fascinating here is that this isn't just a story about a financial crash.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really a story about human nature. It's about how a culture's unshakable faith in endless prosperity ended up completely blinding its smartest leaders.
Okay, let's unpack this. How do we get to a point where the most powerful banker in America is essentially emptying his own pockets on a street corner just to save the global economy?
It's a great question. And to understand that, we have to look at how Wall Street convinced everyday Americans to treat the stock market like, a grocery store.
Right, because before the 1920s, going into debt was largely viewed as a moral failing.
Yeah, it was taboo.
But then you have companies like General Motors. In 1919, they figured out that if they sold cars on an installment plan, they could move exponentially more product.
Buy now, pay later.
Exactly. Sears started doing it with appliances. It was everywhere.
And it transformed credit from this shameful secret into the primary engine of the Roaring '20s. And Wall Street, they looked at the success of these consumer installment plans and realized, hey, we could apply the exact same psychological lever to the stock market.
Wow.
Because historically, buying stocks was this parochial, closed-off club just for the very wealthy. But men like Charles Mitchell saw an entirely untapped market in the American middle class.
So what did he do?
He systematically transformed National City into what he called a bank for all. He literally instructed his army of bond salesmen to sell securities over the counter the exact same way a clerk sells neckties.
I love that detail from the sources. Neckties. Framing a complex financial instrument as just an everyday accessory you pick up on your way home from work.
Yeah, just grab a bond with your groceries.
And the mechanism they used to sell those neckties was the margin account. This is really vital to understand. You didn't need the full price of the stock.
Right.
You could put down as little as 10% of the purchase price and then borrow the remaining 90% from your broker.
And the pitch was incredibly seductive.
Oh, totally. The stock goes up, you pay off the loan, and you keep the entirety of that massive profit.
It fundamentally shifted the psychology of the American consumer. Debt essentially draws the wealth of tomorrow into the present. And, the math of margin trading is just intoxicating when the market is rising.
Because it multiplies your gains.
Exactly. If you invest $10 to buy a $100 stock and that stock goes to $110, you haven't just made 10%, you've doubled your actual cash investment.
Right.
But the inverse is equally true and far more dangerous. If the stock drops to $90, your entire initial investment is wiped out instantly.
It's like buying a house on layaway, but you get to keep all the profits if the neighborhood gets trendy. It sounds amazing on paper, but if everyone is borrowing to buy, who is actually holding the bag when the neighborhood inevitably goes down in value?
Well, the lenders hold the bag. The banks, the brokers, and ultimately the entire structural foundation of the financial system.
And the scale of this was huge, right?
Yeah, staggering. Margin loans grew from $1 billion at the start of the decade to nearly $6 billion. This massive influx of borrowed money turned the market into a cultural obsession. We saw the birth of the celebrity businessman.
Titans of industry plastered on magazines.
Treated as infallible visionaries.
Which perfectly explains how a naturally skeptical guy like Groucho Marx gets pulled into the casino.
Oh, the Groucho story is classic.
It's so good. In 1929, Groucho is at his local brokerage in Long Island. His broker points out that RCA stock is trading at an astronomical $535 a share.
And Groucho asks a very logical question.
Yeah, he asks, how can it be selling that high when the company has never even declared a single dividend?
Which is the only rational question to ask. I mean, a stock is theoretically a piece of a business, and if the business isn't paying out profits, the price is purely speculative.
But the broker talks down to him. He tells Groucho, Wall Street is no longer localized. We're now in a worldwide market. It's going to keep going up and up and up.
He shames him for doubting the new paradigm.
Exactly. He leans on this idea that the system is bigger than both of them. So Groucho buys into the narrative. He starts buying heavily on margin, taking hot tips from elevator operators.
Like everyone else.
Yeah. And then, in late October 1929, the market breaks. Groucho gets the dreaded margin call as Gricker demanding cash to cover the plunging value of his borrowed shares. Groucho actually had to mortgage his own house just to pay off the debt.
And when Groucho confronted the broker about his grand promise of a worldwide market, the broker simply apologized and said he made a mistake.
And Groucho's response is amazing.
It encapsulates the entire era. He says, no, I'm the one who made a mistake. I listened to you.
Wow.
It perfectly illustrates a fundamental law of leveraged markets. The system functions perfectly up until the exact second that confidence evaporates. It happens gradually, then suddenly.
And because margin lending required a constant massive flow of borrowed money just to keep the prices artificially inflated, the system became incredibly fragile.
Highly fragile.
And that fragility forced the central regulators in Washington to start panicking, which triggered a massive clash of egos.
Because the Federal Reserve was supposed to be the institutional adult in the room. In February 1929, the Fed Board issued a formal warning against banks using their funds to make loans for stock speculation.
They called it moral suasion.
Exactly, moral suasion. They were attempting to persuade investors to act rationally without actually utilizing their regulatory power to force a change.
Because they refused to just raise the discount rate.
Right.
They didn't want to make borrowing more expensive for regular legitimate businesses like farms and factories, but they desperately wanted the stock market gambling to stop, so they just wagged their fingers.
But rationality is entirely subjective in a bubble. The Fed's warning caused a brief psychological dip, but the lure of easy money was just too strong.
People couldn't resist.
The speculation came roaring back, and the tension built until March 26, 1929, when the entire mechanism briefly seized up.
The market went into an absolute freefall.
Sales volume was so high, the physical ticker tape fell hopelessly behind, plunging traders into that terrifying darkness we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Call money, which are the overnight loans that brokers use to fund all those margin accounts. It became so scarce that the interest rate hit 20%.
Wait, 20% interest overnight?
Yep.
Think about the mechanics of that. If you are paying 20% just to borrow the money to hold your stock, the stock has to rise by an astronomical amount just for you to break even.
Which forces everyone to sell simultaneously. It was a total credit freeze. The oxygen completely left the room.
And this is the exact moment Charles Mitchell decides he's had enough of the Federal Reserve's moral suasion.
I sure do.
Mitchell steps up, unilaterally defies the Federal Reserve, and pledges $25 million of national cities' money to lend to speculators. He turns the oxygen back on single-handedly.
And the floor traders literally cheer him as a hero.
But, I really struggle with Mitchell's motives here. To me, it's like a rogue firefighter who decides to pour gasoline on a burning house just to keep the occupants warm. Did Mitchell actually save the market, or did he just guarantee a much larger explosion later by rewarding the gamblers?
What's fascinating here is the danger of an individual overriding an institutional safety valve. Mitchell genuinely believed that a sudden crash would devastate the real economy, so he felt a moral obligation to provide liquidity.
He saw himself as a hero saving the golden goose.
Exactly. But the Federal Reserve saw him as a mutineer. By unilaterally overriding their authority, Mitchell signaled to the entire market that Wall Street was essentially too big to fail.
He proved that if things got bad enough, the big banks would always step in to bail them out.
Exactly.
But there is a much darker reason the big banks needed to keep the public buying. While Mitchell is out there publicly playing the hero and saving the market for the everyday investor, the sources reveal that the elite insiders were quietly playing a completely different, highly rigged game behind closed doors.
They needed the public to keep buying so they could unload their own shares.
Exactly.
The 1920s saw the explosion of the investment trust. On the surface, it looked like a modern mutual fund. But in reality, it was often a vehicle for hidden leverage and political favoritism. A prime example is the Allegheny Corporation, set up by Thomas Lamont and J.P. Morgan.
Right. So Lamont takes this holding company, and they offer shares to the public at $35. But Lamont sends out these quiet, friendly telegrams to a highly curated VIP list.
Powerful friends.
Yeah, former President Calvin Coolidge, Charles Mitchell, the head of the Democratic National Committee, he offers them shares at a secret insider discount of $20 a share.
It's an immediate guaranteed profit the second the stock goes public.
And he isn't just doing this to be nice. He is systematically buying political favor and regulatory silence.
It ensured that the people with the power to stop the bubble were directly profiting from it. And then you have the sock pools, which were even more blatant manipulations of the mechanics of the market.
Oh, the pools.
Yeah. Michael Meehan, the specialist for RCA stock, gathered elite businessmen like William Durant, the founder of General Motors, and Walter Chrysler. They pooled millions of dollars to secretly trade RCA stock back and forth among themselves.
This is a tactic called painting the tape, because the physical ticker tape is the only source of truth for the public, right? So if Meehan and his friends trade the same shares back and forth rapidly, the ticker prints RCA over and over again. The public sees this massive volume, assumes there's huge organic demand, and they rush in to buy. The price skyrockets.
And then the pool managers pull the plug.
They dump all their shares onto the unsuspecting public at the peak
Aye.
and walk away with nearly $5 million in pure profit in a single week.
We also see this mastery of market mechanics with Jesse Livermore, the legendary boy plunger and short seller. He really understood how to manipulate the flow of information.
What did he do?
Livermore invited reporters to his secretive penthouse office and fed them a highly convincing tip that cotton prices were about to surge.
A total distraction.
Exactly. While the press and the floor traders were entirely distracted by the frenzy in the commodities market, Livermore's brokers were quietly executing a massive $150 million short assault on the broader stock market.
Wow.
By the time anyone realized what was happening, he had made an $8 million profit in 28 hours.
Wait, this was entirely legal. This sounds like sitting down at a poker table where the dealer is secretly texting his friends the river card. You have absolutely no chance.
Yet it was entirely legal at the time. There was almost zero federal regulation of the securities markets. Wall Street operated as a private self-policing club.
That's wild.
And these men operated in a profound echo chamber. They didn't view themselves as fraudsters. In their worldview, outsmarting the public, the quote-unquote dumb money, was a mark of absolute genius. They genuinely believed their immense wealth was proof of their inherent virtue.
But for these overt manipulations to continue, the insiders needed the regulatory bodies to remain completely paralyzed. Which brings us to the political battlefield in Washington.
Right.
You have Wall Street openly defying the Federal Reserve. You have insiders rigging the tape. And the political establishment in Washington fractures into total gridlock, unable to stop the runaway train.
It was a perfect storm of political paralysis. On one side, you have the newly elected president, Herbert Hoover.
Who was an engineer by trade.
Right. And his political philosophy was decidedly hands-off. He deeply believed in the natural self-correction of markets and was fundamentally hesitant to use executive power to intervene in private business affairs.
And on the other side, demanding intervention, you have Senator Carter Glass of Virginia. And just to stick to the facts from the source material impartially here.
Right.
He was the brilliant architect of the Federal Reserve System, but he was also a staunch, outspoken segregationist who fought tirelessly for Jim Crow laws.
Yeah, that's his history.
And he was a deeply combative figure who absolutely loathed Wall Street speculators. He viewed margin trading not just as an economic risk, but as a moral failing that actively siphoned vital capital away from legitimate farming and manufacturing.
So when Charles Mitchell defied the Fed, Glass was absolutely furious.
She publicly accused Mitchell of mutiny.
He did, and Glass proposed a legislative amendment to levy a 5% tax on any stock held for less than 60 days.
Oh, to hit the day traders?
Exactly. The mechanism was specifically designed to destroy the profit margins of day traders and pools, effectively crushing the gamblers while leaving long-term investors alone.
But the Wall Street titans refused to let that happen. William Durant literally sneaks into the White House at night to warn President Hoover that the Federal Reserve is destroying American prosperity.
And Hoover brushes him off.
Right. So Durant buys airtime on CBS radio and broadcasts a speech attacking the Fed, claiming the regulators are actively hurting the American working class.
And it wasn't just him. John Raskob, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, takes it a step further.
He was plotting revenge, right?
Yeah, he was furious that his friend Al Smith had lost the presidential election to Hoover. So Raskob personally hires a journalist named Charlie Michelson, pays him $25,000 a year to run a relentless, covert press smear campaign against Hoover.
I mean, the wild irony here is almost unbelievable. Here you have guys like Durant and Raskob who are literally manipulating stocks and secret pools, going on the radio and funding press campaigns to claim that the regulators are the enemies of the American working class.
That's incredible.
They wrapped their own private greed in populist language just to keep the government paralyzed.
And it worked flawlessly. The intertwining of massive wealth and political influence meant there was no unified front to cool the market. Hoover's engineering approach clashed entirely with Carter Glass's moral outrage, and the resulting gridlock meant there was absolutely no one left to hit the brakes.
So because Washington was paralyzed, the market ran completely unchecked into the summer of 1929, reaching a state of pure euphoric mania.
Even as the smartest men in the room began quietly looking for the exits.
Yeah. The cultural signs of a bubble were just everywhere. In the dining room of the Plaza Hotel, you had Wall Street titans eating lunch next to Evangeline Adams.
The astrologer.
Right, an astrologer who was giving out stock tips based on the zodiac to her 100,000 subscribers.
The optimism was institutionalized. Yeah. You have Al Smith announcing the construction of the massive Empire State Building. Jack Morgan, J.P. Morgan's son, commissions a 343-foot yacht, the Corsair IV.
And John Raskob announces the Equity Security Company,
which was an investment trust designed specifically for the working class, so factory workers could buy stocks on an installment plan.
His literal message was, everybody ought to be rich.
And American bankers were acting like global heads of state. Thomas Lamont and David Sarnoff, the head of RCA, were in Paris negotiating the Young Plan to restructure Germany's war reparations.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
When the talks almost collapsed, Sarnoff managed to bond with a rigid German negotiator, Dr. Schacht. And they bonded because they discovered they could both speak Hebrew. They saved the global financial agreement, which only reinforced this dangerous idea that American businessmen were the true masters of the universe, capable of solving any problem.
But despite all of these massive public triumphs, there was a secret pivot happening behind the scenes.
Right.
Lamont privately writes a letter to his son, instructing him to liquidate millions in stock and hold on to cash. And John Raskob, the same man preaching, everybody ought to be rich, privately begins shorting General Motors stock.
It's staggering cognitive dissonance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like they're dancing on the deck of the Titanic, and the captain is quietly booking himself a lifeboat while telling the band to play louder.
That perfectly synthesizes this final stage of a bubble. The leaders knew the math of the debt could no longer support the inflated prices, but the social and financial pressure to keep dancing was just too strong.
They couldn't stop.
They believed they could time the market, They thought they could escape right before the music stopped.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I mean, the mechanics of 1929 might seem like ancient history, but the underlying human psychology hasn't changed a single bit.
Not at all.
The democratization of credit, combined with unchecked insider power and a political gridlock, created a massive house of cards. Think about the FOMO, the fear of missing out that sweeps through our modern market.
That's so relevant.
Whether we're talking about the dot-com boom, crypto, or AI, it is incredibly easy to get swept up in the euphoric mania of a booming market, to believe that the neighborhood is just going to keep getting trendier.
The allure of easy money is timeless. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about how in 1929, the delay of the physical ticker tape caused blind panic because people didn't know the true price of their assets.
Right.
Today, we have instantaneous information on our phones. Does this modern transparency actually prevent market panics? Or does it just allow the psychological contagion of fear to spread globally in milliseconds instead of hours?
Are we actually safer with instant data, or is the fuse just infinitely shorter? That is a brilliant question to end on. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning the mechanics behind the numbers and always look for the humans pulling the levers. Take care, everyone.